Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. What, why, and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 14th of June 2023. Before we begin the discussion, there is an important announcement by Jatin sir.
Raus IAS is going to conduct the mains revision classes for 2023, which will prepare you for the mains 23 examination. As you must be well aware that these classes have boosted the score of many IAS toppers. For example, Anandya Rashri, Pooja Jha, Namrata Chaube, and helped them to score a good rank in the top 100. As far as features of this program is concerned, so all the students and the participants are going to get 150 hours of revision classes that will cover all the important subjects, important themes in the question and answered format. Students will also get one-to-one mentorship in unlimited format. There will be a dedicated mains test series that will help you to simulate exam-like experience and revise your syllabus in the time-bound manner. This test series will also provide you the timely feedback which will help you to score even more. All the teachers taking the classes will be providing you the important and relevant notes which will be handy for you to revise in the last time. There will be 4 hours of classes every day between Monday to Friday. The teachers would include Baswa Upin for economics, Mr. Faizan Khan for ethics, Vaibhav Mishra for polity, Gaurav Tripathi for environment and geography, Ankit Kaul for international relations, Mr. Arun Bharadwaj for science and technology. The second announcement is with respect to the optional test series from political science that is open under the guidance of Rahul Puri sir. This test series would include 16 tests, 8 sectional and 8 full-length tests, along with the evaluation with sample answers and detailed feedback. Over 40 hours of classes comprising detailed test discussion will be conducted for the subscribers. The detailed schedule of the entire test series has been displayed on your screen. In order to know more and subscribe to this test series, there's a link given in the description box that you can follow. Now let us begin the first article for today's DNS.
UN needs to be more democratic and representative, says Rajnath Singh. Commenting on the fact that India is yet to find a place as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh said that the time had come for the UN and its bodies to be, within quotes, more democratic and representative of the current realities of our age. Now, if you look at the syllabus of GS Paper 2 International Relations sections, important international institutions, agencies, fora, their structure and mandate is a part of his syllabus. Not only that, UPSC has frequently asked questions on global institutions. For example, in Mains 2020, UPSC had asked, critically examine the role of WHO in providing global health security during COVID-19 pandemic. As a matter of fact, we had indeed discussed this topic in DNS in great detail, as you can see on the screen. So in the upcoming discussion, we are going to first talk about important takeaways from the Ukrainian crisis. Then we are going to focus on UNSC reforms. What are the current issues with the way UNSC is designed, its functioning? What are the proposals for its reform? And what is the case for India's permanent membership at UNSC? Let us now begin the discussion. Starting with the takeaways from Ukrainian crisis. According to the author, another Iron Curtain is coming down. So all those who do not know about this context, the Iron Curtain was a political boundary dividing Europe into 2 separate areas from the end of World War II in 1945 until the end of the Cold War in 1991. As you can see on the screen, the term symbolized the efforts by the USSR to block itself and its satellite states from open contact with the West and its allied states. And from the current crisis, it appears that another form of curtain is coming down in Europe. Countries allied to Russia and its interests are forming one side of the curtain, and countries allied to the West are coming on the other side of the curtain. Then the second important point highlighted by the author is about untying of nations. So according to the author, the global order has broken down and events in Ukraine have exposed the United Nations and Security Council of their complete ineffectiveness. Russia's actions in Ukraine may, in terms of refusing to seek an international mandate, seem no different from war by United States in Iraq in 2003, Israel's bombing of Lebanon in 2006, and Saudi coalition's attack of Yemen in 2015. And so according to the author, this might be the beginning of fragmenting of the international order established with the UN. At the same time, we could be seeing the beginning of de-dollarization of economic order. The economic order which is dominated, or the financial system which is dominated by US. Because of the sanctions imposed on Russia, Russia will now increasingly resort to the systems which will now bypass USA, and it will motivate other countries, for example China and Iran, North Korea, to take the same bus. And so gradually, the world may see a non-dollar system emerge which would run banking, fintech and credit systems separately from the dollar world. And finally, this could result in the process of deglobalization. It could put brakes to the massive globalization which we have seen in past 20 to 30 years. So I hope that most of you might have watched this video and have gone through the prelims level discussion. And you might have realized by now that United Nations Security Council is a kind of crisis management body of United Nations. And since it is the most important tool available in the hands of United Nations, it has some very important and prominent powers as well. For example, imposing sanctions on various countries or group of countries. But as we have seen that most of the problems, especially related to law and order across the world, have still not been resolved, and if they have been, the involvement of UNSC has been minimal or in the background. There's hardly any dispute across the world or any internal strife or the fight between two countries which have been resolved due to active intervention of UNSC. And that is mainly because the way UNSC has been structured, the way the powers have been divided among the global powers, and the way that power is used in day-to-day scenario. And so let us see what are the issues with the way UNSC is organized and the way it functions. And when it comes to United Nations Security Council, one of the first objections or the issues which is raised against it is that it does not reflect, or at least the current structure does not reflect the current realities of the global order. So most of us already know that UNSC comprises of two kinds of members, permanent and non-permanent members. So permanent members known as P5, we already know them. So out of the total membership of 15 members, 5 members never change. They never seek re-elections. They don't have to worry about their membership of UNSC. They're always there on the deciding table. So this privileged status of permanent members has its genesis in the foundation of United Nations itself. All of us, even remotely connected to the history of the modern world, know that United Nations was created in the aftermath of World War II. Basically to avoid any kind of war in the future. As far as the outcome of war is concerned, we already had 3 clear victors: USA, USSR and UK. So of course, if there were to be any United Nations Security Council, they had to be the permanent members. At the same time, UK was very worried about any kind of future German revival of nationalism, and so it insisted on France becoming a permanent member. At the same time, USA insisted on inclusion of Republic of China, which later on became Taiwan, as the permanent member. So this was in 1950s, but now today is 2021. And you can see that there has been almost no change as to where the actual power lies as far as UNSC is concerned. The P5 members are still the same. Of course, the seat which initially went to Taiwan has now gone to China, but except that there has not been any change. Now that is not to say that UNSC has never reformed. Of course, there are 2 notable incidents. For example, in 1965, the number of elected members, the number of non-permanent members were increased from 6 to 10. So what you have now was implemented in 1965. Initially, there were only 6 non-permanent members. Then in 1971, of course, the seat of Taiwan was ceded to China. So these are the only 2 instances where minor amendments have been made in the organization of UNSC. So now you can understand that there has been very minimal change in the organization of UNSC, especially where the actual powers belong. Even though the membership of United Nations has quadrupled in last 30 to 40 years. And so what it does is that it creates 2 major problems with the way UNSC is perceived. The first is with respect to the lack of regional representation in the current structure, which does not reflect the current realities. And the second one is that none of the important regional powers find their place in UNSC. So if you look at UNSC, Europe is overrepresented in the overall structure. There are 3 countries from Europe if you include Russia. So out of 5, around 60% of the power is held by Europe. And there is not a single representation from Africa and South America. And this is astonishing because most of the peacekeeping interventions by UNSC have been done in Africa. Apart from that, countries like India, Germany, Brazil, Japan, all of them, not only big economies in their area, have very good and technologically advanced militaries, and also all of them are democracies, do not find their place in UNSC. And whatever may be their contribution to the global order, they have to contest for non-permanent seat every now and then. And let us now go much deeper into this comparison. Let us see how these countries, the group of 4 countries, India, Germany, Brazil and Japan, which are a group of countries which mutually support each other's inclusion into UNSC, stand with respect to the permanent 5 members. And here is a chart in front of you which shows comparison of these 4 countries, G4, with that of P5 on various parameters, which are population, territory, GDP, UN funding, UN peacekeeping funding, UN peacekeepers, defense budget, military. And so you can clearly see that as far as population is concerned, the world's largest populous country, which stands first in the parameter of population, of course, is a P5 member. That makes sense. But what about the second most populous country? If you are not giving membership to India, you are depriving 18% of the world population any voice at the highest level of global decision making. Similarly, if we talk about economy or GDP in PPP terms, world's largest economy being China and US are permanent members. But world's third largest economy, that is India, fourth largest economy, that is Japan, fifth largest economy, that is Germany, do not find their place in P5. But you have Britain, France as members, which have much smaller economy as compared to India, Japan and Germany. Similarly, if we look into defense budget or active military, India does not find this place despite being in top 3, which matters. So now I hope you can clearly see how the current structure of United Nations Security Council is not reflective of current realities of the global order. Alright, so that is the problem number 1. Then the next important issue or challenge which UNSC faces is the allegation of undue use or advantage given to P5 members owing to their veto powers. Most of the non-permanent members and most of other members who are not a part of UNSC often complain about the misuse of veto power. Now, what are the major complaints as far as possession of veto powers by P5 members are concerned? The first and foremost is that it is undemocratic in its very essence, because democracy by its very meaning means one person, one vote, and veto is an idea which is quite contrary to that. It gives special privilege to some people, debarring others of that same right. And it is quite laughable that one of the important agenda of United Nations is to promote democracy or democratic liberal values across the world and at the same time protect human rights. So since veto power violates equal and full membership to all the members, it is quite undemocratic in nature. But the problems with veto is not limited to its undemocratic nature. It also extends to how and why the reforms have been stalled. Because if you trace the lack of reform as far as UNSC is concerned, more often than not, it is the veto power which is utilized to stall the reform. And the simple reason behind that is that no change in the constitution of UNSC can be brought about by a resolution passed by all the members. And even if one member, that is veto a resolution, it cannot be passed. And the countries across the world, countries like Germany, India, Japan, would still bear these two issues if it were for right cause. But more often than not, veto power has been the main reason behind United Nations' failure to prevent violations of human rights. So for example, most of the resolutions condemning the actions of Israel in Palestine are frequently and regularly vetoed by US. And so no significant action has been taken against Israel for its human rights violations or allegations of human rights violations in Gaza and West Bank. So it's just not the US which is culprit. Even China and Russia are not off the hooks. Because when it came to Syrian civil war and the allegations of human rights violations and atrocities committed by the ruling president Mr. Bashar al-Assad, the repeated resolutions were blocked by the combining forces of China and Russia. So these were the two instances where United Nations Security Council failed to actually criticize or pass resolution against atrocities being committed by Israel and Syria. But at the same time, it has also failed to stop invasions by powerful countries. For example, the invasion of Iraq by United States of America on the pretext that the Saddam Hussein government possessed weapons of mass destructions. Of course, no evidence so far has been found in that regard, but still, you know that how that country reeled under US invasion for almost 15 years. And there has been no resolution to stop US from doing that. We all know what US invasion has done in Middle East, especially in Iraq. It not only induced instability in that region, but also gave genesis to one of the most brutal and ruthless terrorist organizations like Islamic State. So far we have looked into two kinds of issues with UNSC. Current structure, which is not reflective of current realities, veto power and its concomitant problems. Let us now look at third and last issue, which is failure of peacekeeping mandate of UNSC. And this problem is just not with the way they carry out themselves when they are in some strife-riven area, but it also deals with what is the outcome of deploying these peacekeeping forces in areas like Africa. And one of the basic and regular complaints which come against the peacekeeping forces is the news related to the human rights violations committed by the peacekeepers. There's not one, two, but multiple instances of human rights violations like abductions, killings, rape, murder, and various other kinds of problems which peacekeepers have themselves been accused of conducting. For example, in 2016, an investigation revealed where at least 25 minors were abused by around 41 peacekeepers in a single night. At the same time, the maintenance of these peacekeeping forces is very, very costly. But that high cost would still be tolerable if the peacekeepers are able to bring some long-lasting changes in the society, in the polity. Basically, the purpose for which peacekeepers are sent, they fail to achieve that. They are not able to induce any long-lasting peace in strife-riven areas or in disturbed areas. Although as far as they are deployed, some peace is maintained, but that is just a very shallow and artificial peace under the pressure of arms of United Nations. But as soon as they withdraw themselves from the territory, the region again limps back into instability. And two notable examples of utter failure of UNSC has been its mission in Somalia and Bosnia. Because you have to realize that ultimately the regional problems like these arise due to geopolitical and various other local factors. And deployment of these peacekeepers is actually not solving the geopolitical or local social problems. For example, a war going on between two tribes is not being resolved. And so there cannot be a long-lasting peace solution when you are just deploying few soldiers over there. So these are the three main challenges which are often raised against UNSC. And so what is actually the way forward? What are the main proposals which have been put forward as far as a reform agenda of UNSC is concerned? And so the reform proposal of UNSC mainly spans around 5 main topics: categories of membership, question of veto, regional representation, size of enlarged SC, and relationship between UNSC and UNGA. So of course there is demand from across the world to increase the number of permanent members of UNSC. Then the second reform proposal circles around the question of veto, whether it should be continued or whether it should be removed from the UNSC functioning. Third important reform proposal is around the regional representation, in which we have seen how skewed it is. And so it is connected with the first reform proposal. As and when the number of permanent members of the UNSC will be increased, of course, it is expected but not certain that regional representation is going to increase, especially if we talk about inclusion of G4 members. for giving adequate regional representation, you cannot debar most of the current members of UNSC, and for that, you will have to increase the size of the UNSC. And last but not the least, relation between UNSC and UNGA. And on the issue of reforms, the members of United Nations have already made their own groups, somewhat like pressure groups. And these groups have a common agenda of reforms, mostly in terms of membership of UNSC and matter of veto power. So the most famous one being G4, the 4 countries which support mutually each other's membership into Permanent Council. Then United for Consensus or UFC are those countries which are united not for reform but united to stall the entry of these groups into the permanent membership of Security Council. For example, neighbor of India, Pakistan, Germany's neighbor, Italy, Brazil's neighbor Argentina. So basically all those countries which will be directly or indirectly impacted by the entry of G4 into the permanent membership of United Nations Security Council. Then you have African Union, L69 and Arab groups similarly vouching for one or the other kind of reform. So after dealing with issues and how they can be reformed, let us now talk about one of the most important components of UNSC reform, especially from the perspective of civil services examination, and that is India's case for permanent membership. So although India has not been able to actually become a permanent member, but it already has what it takes to become a permanent member. First and foremost, India has been the member of United Nations since its inception. Not just the membership, India has played active role in various processes of not just United Nations but also its various other agencies and fora. Not just being the oldest member, but also India has strong credentials when it comes to its case for the permanent membership. India is a strict adherent of rule of law, not just within the country, but also in its behavior or in its diplomatic relations. And it is one of the most vocal votaries of global norms. When it comes to terrorism, when it comes to trade, or it is about investment or intellectual property rights, whatever it may be. And the latest example being the climate change, India is implementer and promoter of global norms. All those norms which when agreed on a global scale is implemented in India. And so that is why most of the domestic laws in 20-25 years have been a result of international treaties, because India wants to implement those treaties. Of course, possessing strong credentials as far as global rules and regulations are concerned is not something which P5 members themselves follow. For example, US withdrawal from Paris climate deal and then eventual coming back, Chinese behavior in South China Sea, Russia's interventions in Middle East, and American invasion of Iraq are some of the very few examples which suggest that P5 members do not themselves follow these global norms and rules and regulations, but still India has been very adherent to that. No one can deny the fact that India has been very significant regional power in its own right. It is the third largest economy in the world and in second in Asia, and it is the second most populous country across the world and second in Asia. And we have seen in that chart how it is third largest military spender. And so denial of membership for India is actually injustice to United Nations Security Council itself. Then the last and a very significant argument in support of India's membership is that of liberal democracy and its coherence with that of Indian constitution. And the way India's democracy and republic has functioned in past 70 years, it clearly shows that India has capability to accommodate a lot of factions, political views, ideologies, religious communities, castes in a very democratic manner. Hardly there has been violent uprisings because of election results. Of course, India has its own fair share of troubles, not to deny that, but as compared to other countries, India has managed its factions and various ideologies quite well, which in most of the other cases results in violent uprisings and rebellions. And so with such a good record of managing such a factioned polity and society, if India finds its place in United Nations Security Council, maybe we can look at permanent solutions to other global problems, because then India would contribute actively with the experience that it has gained internally. So the next article that we have taken for discussion is about Election Commission's push for internal democracy in parties. So, after taking action against registered unrecognized political parties for failing to comply with norms, Election Commission is likely to take up the issue of internal party democracy within the parties next, according to EC sources. Now, oftentimes we read news related to the internal functioning of political parties, which has nothing to do with their public sphere. How are they electing their presidents and state leaders? How are they managing their funds? How are they distributing the tickets? Or what is the procedure they are adopting to select the cancel culture? Speaking truth to power or a form of mob vigilantism. Many people have come to believe that cancel culture is no longer about holding people accountable and has instead become an online form of vicious mob intimidation. They believe that it first and foremost affects free speech, which is a fundamental right. And if you look at these kinds of instances in past 5 to 10 years, these cases have just risen up. There have been cases of WhatsApp lynchings where the mob or where a group of people in particular village were aroused because of news or WhatsApp forwards which claimed that people have come in their villages for child abduction or organ harvesting. Then of course case of Pehlu Khan Tabriz Ansari related to cow vigilantism. No one can forget Dimapur mob lynching of 2015, where a mob of about 7,000 to 8,000 people broke into a prison, dragged a man detained under suspicion of rape out of Dimapur Central Jail, paraded him naked, and beat him to death in case of vigilant justice. And so, of course, it is important from the perspective of our UPSC civil services examination, because first and foremost, you should realize that there is a particular pattern in which most of the cases are happening. Apart from all the ills that a mob lynching event creates, it also creates fractures in the society, which then is utilized by external state and non-state actors to further widen that fissure. And hence it is important for us to understand it from the perspective of internal security. So we'll first understand what mob lynching is, what are its causes, what are its impacts, and what steps have been taken to curb the menace of mob lynching. And so let us begin by first understanding what exactly is mob lynching. And so mob lynching is basically a form of violence in which mob, which means a group of people gather at a place under the pretext of administering justice without trial. And they execute a presumed offender, often after inflicting torture and corporal mutilation. And so it is a sheer violation of the principle of rule of law. It's just the lack of order. People taking hands in their law is not what we desire as a society. And it is exactly because of this such an elaborate system of criminal jurisprudence have been created, police has been created, independent judiciary has been created. But still we are seeing increasing number of such instances where a group of people, which basically are faceless mob, they gather at a place and they immediately administer justice, which is mostly or usually in the form of death. And it is extremely problematic because instances like this, first and foremost, deter India's image in international arena. Image of India as a democracy is extremely tarnished because of such incidents, and hence it spreads a very negative image for the Indian society and state, that India is not able to protect the life and liberty of its citizens. Because after all, Article 21 says that life and liberty of a person can be taken away only by procedures established by law. And here the people are openly killing other people without any fear of law. Apart from that, if you look at it internally, it loosens India's social fabric. Because inevitably, most of the targets of mob lynching have come from a particular set of people, either from minority or even from Hindu society. They are coming from the marginalized sections. And since the victims of mob lynching inevitably come from selected few group of people, it always raises concern with respect to India's social fabric. It does not just end there, it has an economic component as well. An economic component is so significant because economy thrives at a place which has order, which has predictability, which has peace. And if the instances of mob lynching keep on happening at a particular place or in a particular society, it just reflects on its image as a total anarchical place. There is no order in that particular place, and hence the people would not like to invest at a place which frequently or even rarely observes mob lynching, which means people do not follow the law. And so it disrupts the functioning of the market and makes a section less confident to participate in the economy. They would not want to go out of the place where they do not have much of their own types. And so, of course, it raises concern with respect to the security as well. Rising instances of mob violence threaten internal security because mob lynching creates fractures in the society, and the state and non-state actors which want to create trouble for India or any particular society, they build upon this fracture and try to indoctrinate the youth and other people of that particular group which has been frequently subjected to the mob lynching. Apart from that, when the cases of mob lynching go unpunished, they create problem for law and order as well, because obviously it reduces the authority of the police to act, and it sows the seed of enmity which can become reason for further instability, leading a law and order problem to become a public order problem. And so it is important for us to dwell into the causes as well. So one of the leading causes of mob lynching can be attributed to the prejudices which people garner on the basis of religion as well as on the basis of caste. That this particular person belongs to this particular religion, and so he or she has to behave in that particular way. And not just that, that particular behavior is antagonistic to my own interest, and that is where the problem begins. There is no problem in treating group of people A different from group of people B, but when these two groups start to look at their interest as mutually exclusive and against each other, that's when the problem begins. And so when you look at the cases related to cow vigilantism, the killing of Pehlu Khan and Tabriz Ansari, these are mostly related to that. Then the next set of cases have been motivated because of honor killings or shame killing, which is the murder of an individual, either an outsider or a member of family, by someone seeking to protect what they see as the dignity and honor of themselves or the family. So for example, a couple from two different castes or from two different religions, when they marry, they are often killed by their near and dear ones, even their first immediate family like parents as well, because for them honor is more important than anything else in the world. And so in India, honor killings are often connected to religion, to caste, and other forms of social stratification, even in some cases to sexuality also, because they have been reported cases where people who were homosexuals were also killed. Now honor killing is just not prevalent to our country, but honor killing on the basis of caste is of course intrinsic to Indian society, because caste as an institution does not exist outside the Indian subcontinent. Apart from that, there are other reasons as well. For example, one of the culprit is our criminal justice system. Because people have felt since time long that the conviction rate from our judiciary is very, very low. And even when the convictions are finally made, it takes decades for a criminal to be announced as a culprit and not just an accused. And so this tariq pe tariq has led Indian people, in most cases belonging to rural areas, to believe that unless and until they administer justice then and there, the criminal will run free and there is no way to hold that person accountable. And so best way to serve justice is to do it instantaneously through death without trial. Also, increasing allegations of corruption against the police leads people to believe that if they do not dispense the justice then and there, police is not going to take care of the criminal and maybe release the accused on bail. And they don't realize that bail is a matter of right in most of the cases. And in recent years, social media has emerged as one of the root causes behind the mob lynchings. Because in many of the cases, as we have seen in the introduction, it was revealed that the social media posts, especially viral WhatsApp forwards, created an atmosphere of fear among the local people, because of which they decided to take law in their hand and administer justice instantaneously. And so it is important for the central as well as the state governments to take proper steps to prevent mob lynching because of its deleterious effect on society, on economy, on security, as well as India's international relations. But for that, you need to realize that police and public order are state subjects under the 7th schedule to the Constitution of India. And the responsibility to maintain law and order and protect life and property rests with the respective state governments. And so, Ministry of Home Affairs can at best issue advisory to the states and union territories from time to time to maintain law and order and ensure that any person who takes law into his or her hands is punished promptly as per law. Apart from that, Supreme Court has issued guidelines on preventing mob lynching. And so in this regard, Supreme Court has issued guidelines against mob lynching, which are basically a set of instructions for all the state governments that they shall first and foremost designate a senior police officer in each district for taking measures to prevent incidents of mob violence and lynching. Then they have to conduct vulnerability mapping, that the state government shall immediately identify such districts, subdivisions, and villages where the instances of mob lynching and mob violence have been reported in the recent past or likely to occur in future. Then apart from that, Supreme Court has said in the same guidelines that it shall be the duty of every police officer to cause a mob to disperse, which in his opinion has a tendency to cause violence in the disguise of vigilantism or otherwise. Apart from that, the central government and state government together should focus on awareness creation. The central and state government should broadcast on radio and television and other media platforms, including the official websites, that lynching and mob violence of any kind shall invite serious consequence under the law. And so you can see that if Supreme Court guidelines are clearly followed, the instances of mob lynching should decline drastically. And so, in the backdrop of rising mob lynching cases, there is a growing concern within the civil society. These concerns are compounded by the fact that due to the lack of specific law against lynching, most of the time the perpetrators get away with most heinous crime. And so now, voices in the civil society are coming together to propose a strict legislation against any such barbarism. And so National Campaign Against Mob Lynching released a draft law known as Manav Suraksha Kanun, or acronymed as MASUKA, which has laid the grounds for first defining what mob lynching is. And as per the law, lynching should be made a non-bailable offense, which means that bail should not be exercised as a matter of right. Apart from that, if in a particular area mob lynching has taken place, the station house officer should be immediately suspended, because the station house officer should know that there is such an activity going on and should immediately respond. And if particular SHO has not been able to respond, that person should not hold the office of SHO. And finally, it prescribes life imprisonment for those convicted under mob lynching. Apart from that, states like Rajasthan, Manipur and West Bengal have enacted their own law against mob lynching.
मैंने पूछा एक्चुअली लिखाओ
नहीं 1 मिनट बोला था मैंने, तो 1 मिनट से पहले बुला लिया इसने तुझे।
अच्छा मैं सोचा यार चुप हो जाओ,
बस 1 मिनट ला, तुम गौरव को पता ही है। Court orders central forces for panchayat polls in Bengal. So the Calcutta High Court on Tuesday has ordered the West Bengal State Election Commission should and shall requisition of central forces be necessary in order to conduct the free and fair poll in the state of West Bengal. And if you can clearly understand the importance of a constitutional body known as State Election Commission, from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains examination, State Election Commission is extremely pertinent. Before we do that, let us have a look at 2 questions. And these are just 2 questions, but many other questions have been asked. For example, in 2016, UPSC asked, consider the following statements. The minimum age prescribed for any person to be a member of Panchayat is 25 years. A panchayat reconstituted after premature dissolution continues only for the remainder period. Then in 2011, UPSC asked the Constitution 73rd Amendment Act 1992, which aims at promoting the Panchayati Raj institutions in the country, provides for which of the following: Constitution of District Planning Committee, State Election Commissions to conduct all Panchayati elections, establishment of State Finance Commissions. And then comes that provision because of which we are discussing the whole constitutional provision, and that is related to elections to the panchayats, which is dealt with in Article 243K, which says the superintendent's direction and control of the preparation of electoral rolls for and the conduct of all elections to panchayat shall be vested in State Election Commission, consisting of a State Election Commissioner to be appointed by the governor. Then what are the securities or the guarantees provided to the Election Commission? That is given in clause 2. Subject to the provision of any law made by the legislature of a state, the conditions of service and tenure of office of the State Election Commissioner shall be such as the governor may by rule determine. But provided that the State Election Commissioner shall not be removed from his office except in like manner and on the like grounds as a judge of High Court. So although the states have power to legislate the terms and conditions and tenure of the office of a State Election Commissioner, but his or her removal has been specified by the Constitution, and that has to be on the grounds and on like manner of a judge of a High Court. And the condition of service of a State Election Commissioner shall not be varied to his disadvantage after his appointment. So these are the securities being given to the State Election Commissioner. Some of the important articles which you should remember from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains examination is Article 243B, which deals with the constitution of Panchayat, Article 243C, which deals with the composition of Panchayats, Article 243D, which deals with the reservation of seats, then Article 243G, which deals with the powers, authority and responsibility of the panchayats, and Article 243H, which deals with powers to impose taxes and funds by the panchayats, and finally Article 243K, which deals with the elections to the panchayats. Now, whenever you have to quote the deficiencies in our panchayat system, you can say one of the deficiencies is that Constitution does not mandate the delegation of the power as stated in Article 243G and H, where the Constitution uses the word may rather than shall. So this very important news with respect to international relations appears on page number 1. Quad leaders for open free Indo-Pacific. So the first, India US to diversify semiconductor supply chain. So India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and the US National Security Advisor Jake met in New Delhi on Tuesday and discussed regional and global issues of mutual relevance, a press note issued by Ministry of External Affairs informed. And one of the important discussions were about the availability of semiconductor related technology to India. Starting with what is a semiconductor. So a semiconductor is a material that allows electrical conductivity between a conductor and an insulator. Semiconductors are made from pure elements like silicon or germanium, or compounds such as gallium arsenide. Sometimes their conductivity is changed through doping, which is a process of adding small amounts of impurities to these pure elements, causing large changes in conductivity of the material. So why do we use semiconductors? We use them because they make the devices more compact, less expensive and more powerful. For instance, mobile phones weighed about 2 pounds, costed around $4,000 and held a charge for only 30 minutes of talk time during their initial phase. However, today an individual can buy a smartphone for 5,000 rupees that would give a one-day charge. And that is a result of semiconductor revolution. But it's just one of the applications. There are multiple applications and hence the importance of semiconductor in manufacturing sector. So you can totally understand how revolutionizing inclusion of semiconductor in manufacturing can be. And so it is very significant for us to invest in semiconductor manufacturing because it is going to provide us economic certainty. For example, the pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns impacted the supply of chips to India, and automobile manufacturers like Mahindra & Mahindra and Tata Group were compelled to reduce their production due to this shortage. Then it is going to help us in economic development because semiconductors right now are the building blocks of technology. Indigenous manufacturing of chips will build its smartphone assembly industry and strengthen its electronic supply chain. This will create numerous employment opportunities for Indian youth. At the same time, indigenous capacity would attract local taxes and boost the export potential. And further, India would be required to import fewer semiconductor chips, which would decrease its import bill. At the same time, indigenous manufacturing of chip and semiconductors is extremely important to meet the rising demand for these chips, because according to experts estimate around 50 crore people will join the internet in next decade, thereby demanding more phones and laptops. At the same time, work from home culture warrants an enhanced demand for servers, internet connectivity, and cloud usage. Apart from this, it also has geopolitical benefits driven by data and digital revolution. Increasing self sufficiency of India will decrease its reliance on Chinese chip imports, especially during hard times like recent Galwan Valley border clash. And it will also enhance the security because chips made locally will be designated as trusted sources and can be used in products ranging from CCTV cameras to 5G equipment. This would improve the national cybersecurity profile. So, what is the current position when it comes to semiconductor manufacturing? So, globally, the entire value chain is an interdependence between a handful of countries like USA, Taiwan, Japan, China, and some European nations. So, India has done well in design and verification for the semiconductor industry because most of the global semiconductor companies are having an R&D footprint in our country. However, 100% of our chips, memory, and display are imported into the country. In 2020, India spent around $15 billion on electronic imports, with 37% coming from China. So, although India has two fabrication units, Sitar, a unit of Defense Research and Development Organization DRDO, and a semiconductor laboratory in Chandigarh. These build silicon chips for strategic purposes like defense, space, and they are not available for commercial uses. So, what are the initiatives which have been taken to promote indigenous semiconductor capacity? The first and foremost, National Policy on Electronics 2019, which envisioned positioning India as a global hub for electronic system design and manufacturing, which is acronymed as ESDM sector. It also aimed to encourage the development of core components, including chipsets. Then, Scheme for Promotion of Manufacturing of Electronic Components and Semiconductor or SPECS, where the government will provide a financial incentive of 25% on capital expenditure for a list of products that constitute the supply chain or electronic products. This includes products such as electronic component semiconductors and specialized sub-assemblies. India would be offering more than $1 billion in cash to each semiconductor company that sets up manufacturing units in country. Then we have Modified Electronic Manufacturing Clusters EMC 2.0 scheme, under which the government will provide support for the setting up of EMCs and common facility centers. Then, government has also come up with production linked incentive scheme, under which the government will provide an incentive of 4 to 6% on goods manufactured in India and covered under target segments to eligible companies for a period of 5 years. Then government has allowed 100% FDI under the automatic route in ESDM sector. At the same time, it is also pertinent to note the challenges in front of India when it comes to semiconductor manufacturing. And there are 5 major challenges. First, high cost of establishment. As per government estimate, it would cost roughly $5 to $7 billion to set up a chip fabrication unit in India. Then, we already have very low ease of doing business, on which Government of India is taking a lot of steps, but to no avail. The process of establishing an indigenous semiconductor facility requires clearances and approvals from multiple government departments. Then we have a big technological constraint. The indigenous manufacturing of semiconductor requires the use of high-end technologies. These technologies are licensed from patent holders at a very high price. Then when we talk about structural constraint, FDI in electronic is less than 1% of the total FDI inflows because of the dearth of skilled labor, delays in land acquisition, and the uncertain tax regime. Then the last factor of unstable power supply is one of the very important challenges which is facing the ESDM sector in our country. The smooth production of semiconductor requires the availability of an uninterrupted 24/7 power supply. So if India wants to become a major player in semiconductor and chip manufacturing, these are the 5 areas where it should work upon. So what are the suggestions or the way forward which we can highlight for the government? First, the government should provide adequate funding to augment the research and development potential of technical institutes. For instance, IIT Madras developed a microprocessor named Moshik with funding support from Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology or METI. Then the proposed sovereign patent fund under National Policy on Electronics should be established immediately. It is a wholly or partly government-backed entity that aims to bolster domestic business through the acquisition and licensing of patent technology. Then, the manufacturer need to be given an assurance of minimum domestic procurement by the government and the private sector. The focus should be on manufacturing economical and technically viable options like 28 nanometer chips. The government should also support businesses in the acquisition of semiconductor manufacturing units in other countries. This is easier than setting up a domestic facility and can be done swiftly for ensuring a continuous supply of chips. So you can understand that chip making and semiconductor industry is a very strategic and crucial sector when it comes to strategic autonomy of our country, when it comes to overall economic development of our country, when it comes to employing a lot of people in the manufacturing sector in our country. And so in this regard, this discussion will help you not only in the prelims sector where we have talked about various schemes and basics of semiconductor, but also for the mains examination where we have talked about the challenges and the way forward. Let us now move on to the next discussion. The next article which we have taken for discussion appears on text and context page, the history of cookie insurgency. So recently, Union Home Minister promised ending cookie insurgency problem within 5 years in